WCLN 1170 Radio and Cable Channel 16 are pleased to present We Should Know, hosted by J.W. Simmons, an upbeat, informative look at people, places, and issues facing our community. This education-based analysis of issues will remain positive and informative as we consider closely what we should know.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. We Should Know every Tuesday at 2:30, coming to you from Star Communications Channel 16, WCLN Radio, weekly program on information, education about things, subject matters that you need to know more about, that we talk about, that adds to gravity of understanding for you. And I appreciate your commentary and comments that you send to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com or snail mail at Post Office Box 1482, Clinton, North Carolina. That's 28328. In Clinton, just drop us a card and we look forward to reviewing your comments and suggestions for future shows. Today we're fortunate to have with us probably one of the busiest people around, just trying to keep up with everything, Congressman David Rouzer, 7th District. Congressman, thank you for being with us.
Well, always good to be with you.
Absolutely. And I was noticing and I have to reflect occasionally, you've been in this seat now since 2012.
Not quite, 2014.
2014.
Yeah, 2014. So I'll be entering.
So my information is a bit off, but I'll go with that.
I ran the first time in 2012.
Yeah, that's it. That was it. That was the first time you ran. So when you look at that, and then your experience with the state legislature, it's paramount. You have taken a huge chunk of your life, and you're adding it to public service. When we think of the word public service, I'm going to open the conversation today with this. When we think of public service, and we think of what's going on, not only in D.C., but locally and on the state level, there seems to be some angst there. What are we missing? What do we need to understand to try to get some sense of plurality of thought, some sense of lack of divisiveness? That's probably a big comment to open with, but I think that's what's on everybody's mind.
Well, I think what you're talking about really fundamentally is trust. Elected officials need to have the trust of the electorate and vice versa. Throughout my years of public service, whether it was my time with Senator Jesse Helms on the Hill or Elizabeth Dole working on Capitol Hill, my service in the Bush administration under W, or in the state Senate or now in Congress, our process is a lot more complicated and a lot more nuanced, I think, than what many people realize. In fact, at the federal level, what's really important to understand, if you don't understand anything else or remember anything else from what I'm about to say, is at the federal level, our system is designed to protect the voice of the minority. It's designed to accommodate as many viewpoints as possible and reach a consensus. And if you can't get a consensus, it's designed that you reach a compromise. And if you can't get a compromise, it quite frankly is designed that nothing happened. And a lot of people like to say, oh, Congress doesn't do anything. Well, there's a reason why Congress didn't do anything. Our founding fathers made it hard. They made it difficult. I've often joked that they understood when they put in place the Constitution and the various checks and balances that we have, that they instinctively understood that what they had done was as good as it was ever going to get, and left our own devices, we'd screw it up really fast. And so they made it difficult to get legislation passed. They made it difficult to change the Constitution. They made all those things and put all these challenges in place, all these hurdles in place, to make sure that you weren't running roughshod over the minority. The Electoral College, for example. A lot of people now want to get rid of the Electoral College. They say it doesn't make sense. If you get the popular vote, that's all that should matter. The respective voices around the country and the smaller states, shouldn't count. Well, our founding fathers, again, they want to make sure that nobody was trampled upon. They want to make sure that the voice of the minority was heard. And so that was part of the design of the Electoral College, so that you wouldn't have folks just campaigning in New York or now, for example, in California or Florida and Philadelphia, the major population centers of the country, but it would require that all voices around the country be taken into consideration. And so I think that's a very fundamental, important point to understand, and it's manifest very much so in the rules of the Senate. where I was a staffer for Senator Helms and then later Elizabeth Dole. I'm probably one of the few House members that still has high regards for the rules of the Senate, and particularly the filibuster, which needs to be reformed. It used to be you go down to the Senate floor, and if you were going to filibuster, the whole world would know about it because you had to take the floor and you had to keep the floor. Mm-hmm. Now they more or less hide behind the rules and the cloture petitions, as they call them, which is what you file to end debate. And you got to have 60 votes in the Senate. So just because you have a majority, 51 votes last Congress Republicans had, now they have 53 votes. It means Mitch McConnell's got to go find, in the last Congress, he had to go find 9 Democrats to vote with him to do just about anything. Mm-hmm. This Congress, he's got to go find 7 Democrats. And of course, making it even more complicated now for President Trump, you got a Democrat-controlled House. And in the House, it's majority rule. There is no, there are no minority rights in the House. In fact, the House and the Senate, by the way, were a big compromise, quite frankly. And in fact, our whole system of government, quite frankly, was a compromise. And that's one thing I think that we need to understand is that compromise is how you govern. It's not necessarily a bad word. Now, if you're going around compromising your principles every second, that's a different thing. But if you have preferences on matters, the president, for example, he wants to have 236 miles of border wall. Nancy Pelosi and company, they don't want him to have 236 miles of border wall. Well, in our system of government, each side would give up a little bit and you come to the middle. Neither has been, or Pelosi in particular, they haven't even been willing to come to the table on it.
How much does personality get into it?
I think it's 99.9% personality on that particular issue. Trump's not advocating for 2,000 miles of border wall. He's advocating for 236 miles, which is what the Border Patrol has said that they need in order to better do their job. In addition, he's advocating for more Border Patrol agents, more immigration judges, more high-end technology to surveil the border much more comprehensively and better. So anyhow, that's just an example of the way it should work. But here's the other component that is important to understand too. Really, your body politic in Washington is a microcosm of society as a whole. Today, neighbor against neighbor, community against community. We don't have the cohesiveness that we've had in the past. The country is very divided politically. I think there's a lot of reasons for that.
Should we be alarmed?
I think I would not use the word alarmed, but I think we should be concerned. And the reason why I say that is if this manifests itself, further, these divisions, ultimately you end up in a civil war. And that's what this country has experienced that before. I cannot recall his name at the moment, but there's a book out talking about the parallels of today versus the parallels leading up to the Civil War. And basically you end up with war when all political dialogue ceases. When you just are so rigid in your stance and have so much contempt for the other side, it breaks down into flat-out war.
When you look at that entrenchment of ideology on both sides, if you choose to use the words left, right, what have you, it seems in some cases to be further and further apart. However, at the same time, we see these pockets of individuals that seem to be more in the moderate range of thinking about things that are kind of where you talked about willing to compromise on issues. What can we do, and what do we need to know as just citizens out here on the streets and highways and byways of the country? What do we need to know to help bring that sense of neutrality back?
Well, again, I think it all gets back to trust. When I talk to conservatives, many of them believe that liberals, not necessarily knowingly, but believe they're on the wrong side, the evil side, going to destroy the countryside. When you talk to liberals, they believe that conservatives are evil, and in many cases they're much more pronounced in their detest, for those who are conservative. I can tell you, I can walk in a McDonald's in Wilmington, North Carolina, and look around, and I can tell who's liberal and who's conservative just by how they respond to me when they see me walk through the door. And I remember specifically about 2 years ago, there were 4 ladies sitting at a table, and 3 of them had looks of disgust, and the 4th one was just a look of contempt. And so I went over and I said hello to them, and they said, "Oh, we know who you are." And I said, "All right, now," I said, "I'm going to sit down here and we're going to talk about this a little bit." Well, after we talked for about 5 minutes, 3 of the ladies, they said, "Well, you're not so bad after all." And the 4th one said, "Hell, I think you're still from Satan." And so anyhow, I made a little progress there. But that's what we have to do, I think, is have a real dialogue, with our neighbors, our fellow citizens, and help them to understand that just because you have a different point of view does not mean that you're representing, the evil side, that you're not out to destroy the country. There are 2 very divergent philosophies in terms of what this country should look like. Some want the government to control everything, and many of us, all of us on the conservative side, are very afraid of that because that's how you end up with socialism and eventually communism and
$22 trillion debt.
And tyranny. And tyranny can come in a lot of different forms. We believe in markets. We believe in freedom. Conservatives do. We believe less government, the better. But you're not going to have a good self-governing system if you don't have a moral and very conscious citizenry that is always striving for the greater ideals, that treats your fellow man as you would have yourself treated, the golden rule, all the things you learn in Sunday school and church. And I think that's a big part of the problem that we have in society today is nobody goes to Sunday school and church.
Well, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to explore a little bit more that whole idea of not only this kind of polarization of thought, but the idea of the folks that we get to run for office today. At some point in time, we have to check that. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We're talking with Congressman David Rouzer, 7th District right here in North Carolina, United States Congressman Rouzer. We'll be back in a moment.
Experiencing slow internet? If you have a fast internet package, the problem is most likely your wireless router. With more devices using Wi-Fi, your wireless router may not be able to deliver the speed and coverage you need. We now have the leading solution to enhance your internet experience. Using small devices in a mesh network, these Wi-Fi appliances cover just about any size home so that all your devices can operate to their fullest potential. Whole home Wi-Fi from Star Communications. Get the most out of your internet connection.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us today. I want to take every moment I can to share our guest with you today, former North Carolina Senator, now Congressman, U.S. Congressman, 7th District, covers part of Wilmington, Brunswick, Pender, Sampson, Johnson. Did I miss any?
Well, a couple. Yeah. That's all right.
Yeah.
I've got 7 whole counties and 2 partial counties.
And that's a whole nother show. We could do a show on.
It's an I-40 corridor district in many respects.
It really is.
I-40 shoots right through the middle of it. A lot of agriculture.
A lot of ag people.
I joke I represent a lot of hogs, turkeys, and chickens.
Absolutely.
In addition to the 800 or so thousand folks in the district.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I look at when I look at your district, it has such a diversity of people in it that you can easily talk about this subject that we opened with, which is how we are somewhat polarized on our thinking. And it kind of churns that idea that as we look down the road at people that are willing to step up, because nobody knows more than the people that have done it, what it takes to, number one, run for an office, to get seated into a public service seat, and then to do something in that seat.
Yeah.
So folks are really getting a little bit, I guess, push away from that public service. So the concern is, in the future, are we going to be able to attract some of the best and brightest to do that?
Well, I think the real challenge there is when you have a very divided public, it really makes it hard on families to endure the politics of a campaign, or the governing has never been easy, and in a very polarized environment it's that much more difficult. Because each side basically is punished, if they compromise at all with the other side in a very polarized environment. And again, it all gets back to what we were talking about earlier. We've got to come back to a point where you don't necessarily view the other side as being evil, even though you think their ideas may lead to really, really bad things. Socialism, taxing wealth at 70%, elimination of ICE, and a lot of things that you hear coming out of the left these days. Those of us that are conservative believe if that agenda were to be enacted, it would be very devastating on many fronts for this country. But those who espouse that are not evil in and of themselves. They just have a different point of view, and we need to have a conversation where we can share our ideas and bring people around, to our point of view. And a lot of that gets back to the education system, I think, which, once you become a member of Congress and you're dealing with folks from the other side that have a constituency that doesn't understand the value of the Constitution, doesn't understand what led to the creation of the Constitution, the game's almost lost at that point, because you've got to have an informed citizenry. Our system of government does not work very well without an informed citizenry. So the education system is just incredibly important, where students are educated on why we have a Constitution, why the language that's in the Constitution is there, the history of that. And the honest truth is, most teachers today, they don't know anything about the Constitution or our system of government. So you can blame, a lot of different, point your fingers in a lot of different areas in terms of who's responsible for that failure. But the fact of the matter is, it's a failure, and it's one that I think we've got to address, to where people understand their government a whole lot better than they do today. Most people that even understand their government pretty well don't understand that you got to have a supermajority of 60 votes to do anything in the Senate. McConnell last Congress had 51 votes. He needed 60 to do just about anything. And that's why you have to compromise with the other side to get to that 60. A lot of Republicans and conservatives are like, why, you have a majority in the House, you have a majority in the Senate, or at least in the last Congress. Had a Republican president. Why you did a lot, but why didn't you do X, Y, Z?
Do it all.
Yeah. Well, it's because of the nature of the rules. The rules, again, are designed to protect the voice of the minority. They're designed to force the consensus among all sides. And if you can't get that, it's designed for a compromise. And if you don't get that, it's designed nothing to happen.
And part of what you're saying is the reason we run into these conflicts oftentimes in stalemates is that people are not only just polarized, but they're running that conflict with what the Constitution was designed to do, which was, again, compromise. So then you have to back up and look at the three different branches of government that relates to the judiciary, and then the administrative branch, and all of that's got to have an ebb and flow with that. It seems at some point in time that the huge size of government itself is hard to mainline from your constituency saying to you, this is what we would like to see happen in your district. At some point in time, you have to look at people and go, that's realistic, or that's not realistic, or I'll try, but here's what my obstacles are. My concern is that we got, as you pointed out, a lot of folks that does not understand basic civics to understand how this works. So therefore, they take it in their own hands, and through vandalism or other acts, they decide to effect change without due process. Does that make sense?
Well, the other key component here is we live in a day and time of instant media, instant gratification, whether it's be through 24-hour news service or cable, Fox or CNN or whatever side you happen to be on.
Or podcast.
Podcast, social media. And when you're in a hypersensitive environment like that, all those cable channels and all those shows, guess what they're running their programming based on? Based on ratings. Yeah. What gets the highest ratings? Confrontation, this side versus this side, the arguments, back and forth, incivility, a fight to get a whole lot more attention than folks that are accommodating, of each other. It's just it appeals, to the raw form of human nature. And that's what drives, ratings. People go to what's exciting, what's controversial. But an overload of controversy is not necessarily a good thing. An overload of negative this, negative that, because that's what drives ratings. Eventually, people get jaded with that stuff. And so I think it's important to understand the role that the media plays there. And when the major networks over the years have lost a lot of credibility. So people went to their favorite cable channel. And then when they start to lose their faith and trust in the government institutions, they turn to personalities that they trust, whether it be a Rush Limbaugh, who I grew up with and love, or a Sean Hannity, or somebody like that on the right, or one of the commentators on the left, and where you don't even listen to the other side whatsoever.
You can tell what people listen to or watch on TV.
Yeah. So the point of all that is, even Fox, which is about the only show that I watch, generally speaking, although I'd check out CNN and the others just to see what's being said. But all those channels, no matter what your point of view, they're giving you about 70% of the total package. The other 30% they really don't have time to get into because it's not as juicy, it's not as meaty. But that other 30%, if you're a lawmaker and you're making a decision, that's an important component to consider because that shapes how you view the entire landscape. It's just like if you're in business. If somebody only gave you 80% of the information, your decision might have been very different if you'd had 100% of the information.
Could have made a significant difference.
Yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things that I see with the new your colleagues, should I say, in the House, there's a number of the new folks coming in that have some extreme ideas, and you alluded to one while ago that talked about up to 70% taxation and these kinds of things. And also when you hear folks talking about Medicare for all and this kind of thing, all of that sounds good in the sense of feeling good. But analytically, things have to be tabulated and counted, and it just doesn't add up, does it?
No. Well, Medicare for all would be Medicare and no health care for anybody, in effect, because Medicare was designed for the elderly population, and you start to expand beyond that, the quality of care for everybody is going to decline substantially. And you're just going to end up with socialized medicine where if you're 65 and you need a hip replacement, sorry, we're just going to give you pain pills and you're going to have to sit there till you expire. That's what a socialist system leads to. That's what a Medicare for all would lead to.
And there are examples of that throughout the world.
Oh yeah, many examples of that. And Obamacare embodied a lot of that too. Healthcare had its challenges before Obamacare. Obamacare accelerated and exacerbated, the issues that we have with the healthcare system. So again, more government typically, unless you're talking about the military and areas of national defense, the more government is, the more problems you're going to have.
And even billionaires like Michael Bloomberg has recently come out and talked about this idea. It just doesn't add up. The numbers are just not there. So that's got to tell folks at some point in time, people that are used to dealing with numbers, especially on a mass level, if you don't want to listen to, quote, the traditional politician, you got to listen to people like that and think, well, what do they know that we don't?
Right. Well, Medicare and Medicaid account for more than 50% of total health care spending, and the reimbursement rates to hospitals and doctors is not survivable. That's why the rest of the health care system, you have such an increased pressure on pricing for those who have insurance in the individual market and the small group market. The employer-based market, is the best deal around, even still today. But that's not going to be the case for long under Medicare. If you move to Medicare for all, you're going to lose your employer-sponsored health care, and you're going to be in line. I tell you, two agencies that I get the most grief about as a member of Congress. The VA is one in particular, and then the Army Corps of Engineers. But the VA is the one in charge of health care, basically, for our veterans. In particular instances, great care is provided, but in a lot of instances, they are looking for another home in a big way.
And that's a government-funded system, so that
absolutely.
should go forward as being an example of what happens when you put it in the hands of government.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Bureaucratic domination.
That is exactly right. So we have a lot of challenges in this country, but if we're going to solve them, the American people need to come together and reward their elected representatives for listening to the other side and working with the other side, not castigating them.
We're going to take our second break, and we'll be back in a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Congressman David Rouzer, 7th District, somebody that you need to know. that's working for you in Washington, D.C. Call a friend and stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment as we discuss additional things on some of the committees he serves on.
You come out to replace a bad sensor, and that adds a 5-year commitment to my contract, and you don't tell me? Here's your sign.
Switch to the sign that's keeping homes secure and customers happy all over the area. Security from Star Communications. We pride ourselves on fair pricing and quick, friendly service every time.
Somebody try to break into this place?
Security from Star Communications.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for being with us. We Should Know, Channel 16, Star Communications, WCLN Radio, Summation in the Sampson Weekly newspaper. You can also see this show, or actually hear the show on Mixler.com/oldies1170 each and every Tuesday at 2:30. Today we're talking with Congressman David Rouzer. This is United States Congressman David Rouzer, and I say that with some sense of urgency because folks need to understand on the federal level, as opposed to where you used to serve in the Senate in North Carolina, your priorities quickly changed, and you had to put on a whole different kind of set of, should I say lightly, battle gear to survive, because although it gets,
Sure.
it gets tough either way. But one of the big things that's always been part of your life, when you were working with Senator Dole and others, has been agriculture, and you've got a lineage of things that you were involved in with ag on the national level. But I want to just kind of talk about some of the subcommittees you're on, and of course the agricultural subcommittee is one, and one particular thing that's really heavily, I guess, financially solid in your district is this whole area of livestock. And as it relates to foreign and agricultural exports, we're number 2 in the state with tobacco as far as exported crop. You know where we stand with pigs and chickens. You just don't top that. I mean, it's a big issue here, and I'm sure you get that a lot. Where are we at on the federal level? Should we be concerned about exports? Should we be concerned as we move forward for all those folks that are listening that's out there on a tractor of various color, whether it's red, green, or whatever? This is something that gives folks angst when they hear something said about, well, we're not sure what's going to happen, quote, in China.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking China as you were leading up to it. I was with the president in the Oval Office the other day for a signing of an executive order, and we talked a good little bit about China. In fact, several of his top cabinet members were there and other advisors. And he really believes that they're going to have a big, grand deal forthcoming with China sooner rather than later. And I told him, and I've told him this a number of times, and I've said this publicly when he's not been within earshot, we needed somebody like this to really grab the horns and tackle China in a major way 30 years ago. This would be what Trump's doing today with China should have been done 30 years ago before they were ever granted access to the World Trade Organization. They basically have all the benefits of an industrialized society while also reaping all the benefits of a developing nation. And it's created a very unfair playing field. The other thing to keep in mind about China is they're communist.
Yeah.
A lot of people want to do business in China, but you're doing business in China with a government that is ruthless, has no regard for human dignity or human life.
Which has been proven.
Over and over again. They lie, cheat, and steal better than anybody. They gobble up land all over the world, not for the benefit of anybody else, but for the benefit of them. They're laying fiber all over the world so they can eavesdrop on everybody. They play in our election system. They're very much tied at the hip with North Korea and Russia. And they are set on a long-term course of world domination where they are the #1 economic power and they are the #1 military power. And the only country that can slow that down and to provide a very substantial check and balance to China is the United States. And that's why I think it's so important what Trump is doing right now. These tariffs, a lot of people, particularly free traders, that grew up in the ivory towers of universities and say, oh, it's a horrible policy to move that direction. Well, these countries that are totalitarian is really the only tool that you have, to go to bat with. And they're having a big impact. These tariffs are having a big impact on the Chinese economy. It's bringing them back to the table to cut a deal with the United States to get rid of those tariffs. So the president is using them as a point of leverage, is the point. Mm-hmm. It's not his philosophy to go and have a bunch of tariffs on everybody. He's using them as a point of leverage so that we can end up with freer and fairer trade over the long term with China, which is really, really important. They steal all kinds of intellectual property day in and day out. And they've gotten away with all this, for years and years and years, because everybody's been under this model of, you reduce your tariffs and let everything Chinese come into America, and the rest of the world is going to treat you as you treat them.
Ships come full and go back empty.
Yeah, exactly right. And now, that's not to say that our trade agreements, we've knocked down barriers in other areas such as Japan and Mexico and Canada. Although there were issues, obviously, with NAFTA for North Carolina. We lost a lot of textiles as a result of NAFTA. A lot of people were without work in the manufacturing sector. But when you're dealing with China, people need to understand that what the president's doing with those tariffs, he's using them as leverage to bring them to the table. And he really believes that they're going to have a grand big deal, that China's really hurting, that they are, they're having tough negotiations, but he thinks they're going to come to a good conclusion. Now, agriculture has been caught in the middle of it. It's easy to retaliate against agriculture. They've retaliated against our tobacco farmers, for example, retaliated against soybean farmers, for example. And the president and his team are well aware of that. And those subjects are in the mix of the conversations that they're having with China. And at the end of the day, the president really believes he's going to be able to open up that much more of China for agriculture, products. But you got to remember who you're dealing with. They're communist. They're mean. The government. I'm not talking about the average Chinese person. I'm talking about the government. And the president that they have there now, he's there for life, basically. And he is on a path over the next 20 to 25 years of world domination. And everybody needs to be cognizant about what they're doing.
And folks, I think, need to understand, if you look at the historical trademark too, with China and some other nations, they are friend of ours only when it benefits them.
Yeah.
And it changes, sometimes can change daily. I want to kind of touch on something that segues with this conversation. It's, I think 2017, Bill Gates did a blog to college graduates. In that blog, of course, he lamented that he didn't graduate from college. There was something happening at that time, and we all know what that was happening at that time. He is now considered one of the most wealthiest men in the world. But there was a couple of things that he mentioned as advice, and in that article he talked about. I know everybody's giving you advice, but I've got three things, and I just want to mention two of those. One of them, he said that you should be focused on was something called alternative intelligence. And the other one, of course, was part of that, but it was about biosciences and understanding that as it related to our society as it continued to grow old. Alternative intelligence is a huge part of our agricultural industry now. And when you said fiber a while ago, I tied that question in to that question I wanted to ask you, because laying fiber and getting fiber in our rural areas is going to be, and not only going to be, is now going to be even more so, a cue up for the success of agriculture. So the question is, what role does the federal government have in ensuring that rural population, just as it did electricity and telephones, have to ensuring that we get that fiber in the areas that are typically, again, not as heavily populated, but yet still need that connectivity?
Yeah. Well, the progress is being made in steps, small steps by Congress. In the Farm Bill, for example, we beefed up some of the programs at USDA, particularly USDA Rural Development, as it relates to broadband deployment and loan and grant opportunities for those that are trying to get broadband to the more rural areas. It will be a major piece of conversation, is a major piece of conversation in the context of the infrastructure bill that hopefully Congress will tackle and pass this year. It's one of the few areas I think where we can have a pretty good, strong bipartisan consensus. Is an infrastructure package. The big question is, how are you going to pay for it all? You got to shore up the highway trust fund. Exactly how you do that, all those are cumbersome questions. But broadband deployment and water and waste for rural areas, there are a lot of members just like me that have a lot of small towns. And all my life I've heard about the haves and the have-nots. Today, in many respects, the haves are those who have high-speed internet, and the nots are those that don't have high-speed internet.
Well put.
And that is, it's a real critical component for economic development and attracting young people to come back to rural areas and bringing their families and industry and everything else. It's just absolutely critical in this day and time where the world is so interconnected, and quite frankly, you can't do anything without having access to high-speed internet and do it well. And
the cost, depending on the number of miles, can easily tag in the area of $100 million, and with looking at a federal budget, that doesn't sound like a lot, but in small rural areas where, and again, your constituency in a lot of these small towns, whether it's Clinton, North Carolina, or Elizabethtown, wherever it may be, their access and their future lies in that, and a lot of it too segues into the medical profession with a lot of stuff being done online. Medical doctors now, connectivity online, visuality is critical. If it's behavioral health, the same thing. You got to have a clear, high definition picture. And we hadn't even talked about 5K and where that's going. So all of these things, sometimes folks look at and don't realize that at some point in time, the federal government is part of that, wittingly or unwittingly.
Well, the rules and regulations that surround it, that plays a part. One idea that's been out there is, to better enable our electric cooperatives to deliver, broadband. That's being looked at. And of course, that's how they came into being anyhow, is getting electricity, to these rural areas. When others weren't capable of doing that, having that specific mission. So all those things, we're looking at.
Well, we're going to take our last break, I believe, to come back for our last segment. We've got a lot of stuff, and I tell folks sometimes when I have you on, I need a semester. So we're going to try to get it all in. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back in a moment. We're talking to Congressman David Rouzer, 7th District, right here in North Carolina, about what may be happening in your community and what he's doing about it.
To get the most out of your electronic devices, you need a strong internet connection and a protected home Wi-Fi network. You need high-speed internet from Star. Star has the fastest, most affordable high-speed internet service available for all your devices. We have no long-term contracts or high-pressure sales. Our service speaks for itself, and switching is hassle-free. We take care of everything with free installation from a local company. High-speed internet from Star. Internet at the speed of life.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We're coming up on our last segment, and if you hadn't called a friend, call somebody, tune in. Just remember, if not, we air on Tuesdays each and every week, 2:30 every Tuesday, and we bring you information from the people that is in the middle of the battle sometimes and in the midst of where the energy is going on. And we let those folks tell you what they know about what's going on with issues that's impacting and affecting your life. Congressman Rouzer, I want to thank you again for being here. I can only imagine your schedule when you happen to be in district. I know you've got everybody pulling at you to explain this, go talk to this group. So sitting down taking about an hour with us is a big chunk of your time, and we're hoping that we're touching the questions that people want to know about. So we've touched a little bit on agriculture, and I want to kind of segue on that. If there's things that you see, having in the past worked in the department up at North Carolina State University, we just last week had, actually it was the week before last, we had Tom Melton, Dr. Melton on, who is retired in July. You know him very well. And he's retiring, I think, in July, as best I understand. It's not a secret, so he put it out. But we talked a lot about hemp, cannabis, and what's happening with that. And there seems to be a huge movement in that area that could be billions of dollars assets to North Carolina. As a former North Carolina senator, it's kind of hard for the legislature to turn a blind eye to several $8 or $10 billion potential.
Well, if you're a farmer and you're looking for alternatives, it's hard to turn a blind eye to that, obviously. But you got to make sure that those that are coming to you can pay you. And you know, it's one thing to see it on paper. It's another thing to know for sure that the money's going to be there. You know, once you produce the crop for them. Yeah, now hemp's come a long ways in terms of federal policy as part of the Farm Bill, which was one of the major bipartisan achievements, by the way, this past Congress. I think it passed with 368, maybe 370 some votes out of 435 in the House, which is a major bipartisan win. Revamped and strengthened the Farm Bill, the farm laws that were in place, stronger safety net now. And a part of that stronger safety net is that hemp was made a agriculture commodity. So it is eligible, you know, for all the safety net features that all the other agriculture commodities are eligible for. So that, if you're interested in the hemp business and have been advocating it for a long time, that was a major win. Of course, around here you still have a lot of tobacco, at least what's left of it, and it's a tough time in tobacco right now. One of the things that kind of irritates me is you've had this movement to legalize marijuana all over the country. At the same time, many of those same folks, and certainly a lot of the government and nonprofit and entities that fund all these nonprofits have been so anti-tobacco, but yet they seem to have no problem with marijuana. Talk about the world being on its head. And so anyhow, that has always been a point of irritation for me personally, because I believe in, you know, you ought to have some intellectual honesty about this stuff. You know, if cigarettes are so bad and tobacco is so horrible for everybody, then how in the world are we having this movement around the country that is, you know, pushing the legalization of recreational marijuana everywhere? Well, one of the big challenges that we have in our economy is we can't find labor. And one of the reasons why a lot of employers are having a hard time finding labor is they can't find employees that can pass the drug test. I know employers that out in Colorado, in that area, where their employee base, because marijuana is legal there, their employee base comes into work, they're taking the nail gun and shooting nails through their hand, they're sawing off their fingers with the saws, and finally they had to say, look, if you're going to do your marijuana on the weekend, don't come in here for 48 hours.
So we switch to the work week another day.
Exactly. So how do you run a business like that? And that, if there's anything that's holding back the American economy today, and of course it's growing at a pretty good clip, 300 and some thousand jobs, you know, in January, it'd be growing that much faster and that much stronger, you know, with a good, strong workforce, which gets to the immigration question again too.
Absolutely, I want to get back to that.
Yeah, and so anyhow, going back to hemp, that's different than marijuana. You know, obviously it's a cousin, not the exact same thing.
Very easy switch to turn.
Yeah, and there are a lot of farmers that are moving that way. My only advice to them is make sure that when they sign up with a company to buy it, that, you know, the company's for real and the money's going to be there.
Exactly, and I think part of Dr. Melton's commentary too kind of dealt with just understand you can adopt a small track or do part of that, but don't bet the farm on it all at once. You know, get into it gradually. Which, in fact, you mentioned the whole issue of labor. Immigration and labor are kind of interconnected for agriculture, and part of that. And so when we hear restrictions on immigration, there's always a conversation about why, if you're a farmer, and some of the smartest people I know, and I say this all the time, some of the smartest people I know and some of the biggest risk takers I know are farmers. And so oftentimes they're going to figure out a way to get this done and figure out a way to turn a dollar on it and to continue to improve the environment for their families. So they use a lot of labor that are immigration labor and green card or what have you. So all that process is done. So kind of talk about it from immigration, from where we are, not just the border and not fencing or whatever you want to call it, but the impact it may or may not have depending on how radical we get with this idea on restrictiveness of immigration?
Well, my solution to it is very simple. Make it easy for people to come and go as they please, as long as they have an employer and we know where they're working and who they're working for. So, for example, if you're Joe Carter Farms, and just making up a name there, and he needs 12 folks to help him crop tobacco, or this day and time he needs 100 folks. Yeah. Because operations are so big, due to the economies of scale. He ought to be able to get them at a reasonable price where they come and work and then they go home. If you're a high-tech guy and you don't have enough college graduates to pull from to advance your business, you got folks from India and elsewhere that can come. We have a system that lets them in without some arbitrary cap that some bureaucrat came up with, and or legislative formula that arbitrarily caps the number of H-2B visas. Open it up, and when you have a growing economy, you got to have labor, to feed that economy, to grow it even stronger, and of course, put a premium if you want on those that are here, have an American education, American born. But you come to a point where those run out, and they run out pretty quickly this day and time. And so make it easy, make it simple. And then those that have been here but have been no hindrance to society, in fact, have demonstrated that they have contributed to society, let them earn their way to legal status. In the meantime, shore up the border so that only those can get here that deserve to be here.
Is it important to look at the immigration issue as something you just mentioned, and just kind of a clarification point? It's important to look at being able to track people and understand where they are.
Yeah.
So if you got somebody here and there's a test to determine, did you come in, quote, legally, or did you come into the country for some nefarious reason, then we need to know that. So with that said, is it a multi-level layer of things we're talking about, not just a fence or?
Well, it is, but a border really helps. When you have a barrier, it really helps them track down the smugglers and delay the smugglers and the guys that are trying to come here for nefarious reasons. And in parts of the border, you don't even need a fence or anything because of the terrain, is a very good border in and of itself. And then you got parts in Texas where you got these poor ranchers down in Texas that are stumbling over dead bodies every month. Because what these coyotes do, these smugglers do, that are bringing folks through that are searching for a better way, they twist their ankle or they get sick, they leave them in the desert to die. A lot of people don't realize that. And the crime is so bad there on the border that landowners will tell you they will give the federal government a portion of their land in order to build that barrier, because they're tired of coming home at night and being scared to death if there's some thug around the corner in the bushes that's about to mug them. So it is, Nancy Pelosi and my friends on the other side of the aisle in Congress need to get over their personality spat with the president and recognize that there's a reason why he's advocating, for this extra barrier. But all that is part of the system. You've got to address it for agriculture so that agriculture can get the labor they need when they need it. That's really important. Address it for the high-tech guys that got to have the H-2B visa, H-1B visas. You got a lot of folks who have been here, that have been educated here, didn't come here on their own. They were brought here. They were brought here illegally, the dreamers as they refer to them. The vast majority of them, many of them are valedictorians of their high school. They go on to Carolina or state, but technically they're not legal. Allow them to earn their way, to legal status so they can contribute. There's no use in educating them all and then shipping them somewhere else, because we need the talent. Yeah. We need their expertise and their contributors, to the community. So it's a whole lot more complicated. It's a lot more nuanced than what the media tries to portray and the sound bites that you have out there.
Well, we've come up kind of on our last minute of the show, and so I want to give you. I had much more information I wanted to talk about, and I always kind of feel guilty. I've left something out that I wanted to get in, but
there's no way to cover it all.
You cannot say. So I want to give you about 40 seconds or so here to just kind of wrap up anything that we missed that you want to let the folks know.
Well, I think it's important for folks to know we're in a period of divided government. The House is controlled by Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. I'm in the minority, but still serving on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. Still going to be working in a bipartisan way to get a number of things done, for the district. And it's important for folks, really important for them to understand our system's designed to protect the voice of the minority.
Well, I want to thank you again for being with us, and anytime you have a seat at this table, and we look forward to having you back. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Congressman David Rouzer. We encourage you to see us each and every week at 2:30 on Star Communications Channel 6, WCLN Radio, and may God bless.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of We Should Know with host J.W. Simmons. If you have a question, comment, or suggestion regarding this or any episode, please send your emails to weshouldknowedu@gmail.com. And remember to tune in every Tuesday at 2:30 for another informative episode of We Should Know.